in our headlines on this Monday afternoon, August 1st. Check-up calls on COVID-19 patients deemed high risk are being halted as a greater number of neighbourhood clinics are now able to offer appropriate medical care. The ruling People Power Party is facing a leadership vacuum as its floor leader becomes the latest member offering to step down amid calls for a shift to an emergency steering committee system. And South Korea logs a trade deficit in July for the fourth consecutive month, with the sum amounting to $4.7 billion as energy-related imports rose and China-bound exports retreated. Check-up calls on COVID-19 patients deemed high risk and isolating at home are being halted. The halt comes as a greater number of neighbourhood clinics have been equipped to offer medical care to elderly COVID-19 patients and to those with pre-existing health conditions. Concerns, however, are being raised as the number of critical cases continue to mount amid the recent rebound. In fact, there are 287 severely ill patients as of this Monday. Also today, authorities have announced 44,689 new COVID-19 infections, a tangible decline from the day prior, given the fewer number of testings on Sundays. On the trade front, South Korea logged a deficit of some $4.7 billion in July for the fourth straight month. According to the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Monday, the deficit follows a 21.8% jump on year in imports to over $65 billion on the back of escalating energy expenses. Exports for their part, led by chips and petroleum products, expanded 9.4% on year to about $61 billion, which is reportedly the highest for any month of July, but not enough to offset a deficit this time around. Pundits believe the country may be headed for its first annual trade deficit in 14 years. Meanwhile, with regard to domestic consumption, findings for the month of June show greater online purchase activity on year among consumers here. Analysts are linking the findings to eased COVID-19 restrictions. Our Chemin Jung explains.
More people in South Korea are shopping online on the back of eased virus prevention rules. According to Statistics Korea, the value of online transactions for June stood at 16.8 trillion won, or around $12.8 billion. That is more than a 10% increase from the same month last year. Online purchases of culture and leisure services recovered the most, jumping by 121% on year. This was followed by travel services. Statistics Korea says the increase follows the eased social distancing rules as well as the lifting of mandatory isolation for inbound travelers. More people have also purchased food and beverages online due to its convenience. Most of the online purchases were made through mobile devices like smartphones and tablets. Mobile shopping took up 74% of the total online shopping transactions, jumping more than 3 percentage points. Its transaction value also increased nearly 16% on year to around $9.5 billion. Despite online shopping overall recovering to pre-pandemic levels, direct sales made online to customers overseas dropped almost 60% on year in the second quarter of 2022. Cosmetics were hit hardest. The fall on online sales overseas was mainly on the back of decreased sales of duty-free products. This was due to a large fall in sales to China. Chemin Jung, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol is taking his summer break this week. Now, this is his first official holiday since entering the top office in May, and sources say he'll spend it with a blend of work and rest. He is also expected to stay in the capital city. There is speculation that President Yoon may visit local markets during his break, but details remain undisclosed owing to security concerns. Meanwhile, on the local political front, the ruling party is undergoing a leadership crisis as members of the party's Supreme Council have been resigning from their posts in apparent hopes of prompting a shift to an emergency steering committee framework rather than the one-person leadership of Kwon Sung-dong, who himself has also offered to step down. Our Lee Kyung-eun has the latest.
President Yoon's People Power Party seemingly on course for leadership reset amid ongoing internal turmoil. Full leader Kwon Sung-dong on Sunday posted on his social media that he will step down as the party's acting chair, a role he had been in for the past 3 weeks since the suspension of party chair Lee Jun-suk over a sexual bribery scandal. Kwon cited a serious crisis facing the party, presumably referring to his own scandals too, regarding a personnel appointment and the leaking of private messages between him and the president. Kwon added that he will work toward the launching of a new interim leadership system. On the same day, two PPP lawmakers, Yoon Young-seok and Cho Soo-jin, stepped down as members of the party's Supreme Council, calling for an overhaul of the party.
The party, presidential office, and the government together need a complete renovation.
Their announcement follows the resignation of fellow council member Bae Hyun-jin 2 days ago in order to pave the way for the launching of new leadership system. Under party rules, the party can launch an emergency committee system when the party chair post is vacant or if its Supreme Council, which holds decision-making authority, gets dissolved. Since Chairman Lee still technically holds his position, the second choice is the only viable option. Amid the latest resignations, some party members believe the committee is virtually unable to function already. But others argue that all members must resign, including those deemed close to Chairman Lee Jun-seok, who fear that an interim leadership would block Lee from returning to his post. Chairman Lee, in the meantime, criticized the party leaders for putting power struggles before tackling inflation and other issues. The party is likely to gather opinions in the coming days before making its final decision. Lee Young-eun, Arirang News.
On the defense front, South Korea, the United States and Japan kick off a joint ballistic missile defense exercise in waters of Hawaii on Monday amid heightened security coordination against North Korea's military threats. The exercise, dubbed Pacific Dragon, runs through August 14th. Australia and Canada will also take part. Joined by 8 warships and 2 aircrafts, the drills are aimed at enhancing collaboration on detecting, tracking and reporting ballistic missile targets. Pacific Dragon was set up by the defense leaders of South Korea, the US and Japan back in June. In other news, U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi has embarked on her Asia tour, which has been fueling much debate even before her departure, following speculation about a possible visit to Taiwan. Our Kim Hyo-sun reports.
U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has embarked on her trip to Asia, which will bring her to 4 countries in the region. Her office, however, did not mention Taiwan, amid speculations that she is planning to include a stop there in her itinerary. Her office said in a press release Sunday that Pelosi is leading a congressional delegation to the Indo-Pacific region, including visits to Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, and Japan. It did not specify whether the delegation might make other stops on the way. It further added that the visit will focus on discussing mutual security, economic partnership, and democratic governance within the region. The latest reports of a possible visit to Taiwan by Pelosi have elevated tensions, prompting Beijing to issue warnings against Washington. This is because China views visits by U.S. government officials to Taiwan as sending encouraging signals to advocates of the island's independence. If Pelosi does decide to visit Taiwan, it will be the first visit by a U.S. House Speaker since 1997. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
In Russia, Vladimir Putin says his navy will soon be armed with cruise missiles that can fly at 5 times the speed of sound to strategically respond to those who encroach on his country's sovereignty. Our Ising has more on his remarks.
The Russian Navy is set to receive hypersonic Zircon cruise missiles within the next few months. This, according to Russian President Vladimir Putin, speaking on Russia's Navy Day on Sunday.
We will provide protection firmly and by all means. The key thing here is the capability of the Navy forces, not to mention the latest Zircon hypersonic missile systems, which have no countertypes in the world and no barriers. Dear comrades, their delivery to the Russian armed forces will begin in the coming months.
Russia first tested the Zircon hypersonic cruise missiles in January 2020 and claimed they reached speeds of over 10,000 kilometers per hour, or 9 times the speed of sound, and are able to strike targets within a range of 1,000 kilometers. Touting their firepower, Putin says the missiles will be used against any country that decides to infringe on Russian sovereignty and freedom. That message also came as Putin signed a new 55-page naval doctrine, which sets out the broad strategic aims of Russia's Navy. According to the doctrine, Russia's main threats include the strategic policy of the U.S. to dominate the world's oceans and the movement of NATO closer to Russia's borders. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Right, and those are the headlines for the first half of the Daily Report. In the second half, we address global hunger and a possible alternative. Stay with us.
What matters?
Welcome back. Hunger remains a plight in many parts of the world, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine is aggravating the hardships faced by many in less privileged countries. Now, against this backdrop, some pundits are pointing to the buffer stockpiles of rice in Asia as one of the possible ways of easing the global food insecurity. For more on this, I have Professor Chi-Sang Yu at Kansas State University joining this talk live. Professor Yu, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Professor Sun Byung-min at Chungnam National University live on the line as well. Professor Sun, it's also good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Professor Yu, I'll start with you then. Let's begin with a few words on the current global food status. How severe is the situation, Professor Yu?
So one of the places to start this conversation is to look at how expensive to get food commodities from the global market. So one number to look at is the food price index of Food and Agriculture Organization. So that number has been increasing starting 2020. And in 2021, it's roughly 26% higher than that of 2020, and another 13% went up since the beginning of this year. So to give you some perspectives on this is roughly similar to the rate of increase in 2007 and 2008 food price spikes. Another thing is we want to also look at how expensive to produce these commodities, and fertilizer price is one place to start. And that has been also going up since 2020, but more rapidly since the Ukraine-Russia conflict, which is about 30% higher since the beginning of the year. So basically, things are quite alarming in a way that the getting food from global market and producing food domestically in any countries are going to be expensive.
Right. And Professor Sun, as Professor Yu has mentioned, some have been saying that a global food crisis was brewing well before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What more would you like to add to that?
Thank you for your question. I agree that we are already facing on the high possibility of global food crisis. There are two factors why I agree with that. Before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, many experts argued that the supply chain disruption by COVID-19 and abnormal climate change could lead to rising global food crisis. For example, we already saw that because of a hiking of a confirmed case of COVID-19, it affected the business supply chain and operations. I think that this supply chain disruption is not back to normal yet. And second, we are facing on extreme weather. For instance, the Euro area faces on deadly heat wave. Therefore, European countries which mainly export grain have difficulty to produce their commodities. And also in South and North America, these continents are major crop producers such as wheat, corn, and soybean. And El Nino and La Nina effect disrupt normal weather patterns in this area, and extreme weather also increases the number of flooding and drought in this area. So this extreme weather increases the uncertainty of agricultural production. So these main factors was already happening before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So I agree that a global food crisis was brewing.
Right, and staying with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Professor Yu, both Ukraine and Russia, they make up for nearly a third of the global wheat supplies. And now there are pundits there who believe that rice could be a viable alternative, as it is in abundance here in this part of the world, that being Asia, where countries have reportedly buffer stockpiles. What are your thoughts on this?
So to give some perspective on that statement, we need to think about mainly two things. One would be the demand side, right? In a way that how substitutable between wheat and rice, right? In other words, if the price of wheat is high enough, or if the price of rice is cheap enough, do we see that people moving away from wheat and consuming more rice? Because at the end of the day, taste still matters, and there's room or degree to which that those can be substituted, and we need to have a good idea on that, and the empirical evidence on how these two commodities are being substitutable, it's mixed. We don't have a great consensus on that, so that will play a big factor here. Another side of the equation is look at the supply, right? So if the wheat price is high enough, and the question would be, can we see other parts of the world planting more or producing more? For this cropping season, we need to be aware that for the U.S. Winter wheat, it's already planted before even the conflict started. So there's so much that U.S. farms can do, right? But other countries may respond or maybe not. So degree to which that the farms in the globe and the way that they respond to this price spike would also affect the possibility of rice being a solution to this. One thing to just highlight is that you mentioned a third of global supplies from Ukraine and Russia. So that's the amount that's been traded. If you look at the production, global production, the share is a little bit lower than that. So we have to think a little bit carefully on this. And And final thing I want to mention is the buffer stock that South Korea has or other countries in Asia has. That's also a result of some policy supports, right? So if we think about rice as a long-term solution to be solving the wheat price spike, we have to think about the cost of production of rice.
Right, we do. And keeping that in mind then, Professor Sun, what can you tell us about South Korea's rice inventory and where does the country stand in terms of self-sufficiency with regard to food?
Yes, rice is a staple food in South Korea and many farmers still plant rice. Therefore, rice inventory in South Korea was around 2 million tons on average between 2014 and 2017. This amount is larger than the FAO recommended inventory level for stable food. I think that we have enough rice inventory because of the reduction of the rice consumption by 2.4% per year, but the decrease of rice production by 1.5% per year. So we have oversupply each year in the rice market. Therefore, rice self-sufficiency in 2019 was 92.1%. So if we look at this number, we might think that we are safe on self-sufficiency. However, we also consume wheat and other grain, and the meat consumption has been largely increased. Even though we have high rice self-sufficiency, food self-sufficiency was 45.8% and grain self-sufficiency was 20.2% in 2020. And also corn and wheat self-sufficiency was just 0.5% and 0.7%. Because grain, except for rice, is very important in South Korea, and most grains are relied on the importation. So we have to concerned about the self-sufficiency with regard to food.
Right, of course we do. Professor Yoon, now this may be taking it a bit far based on what you told us earlier, but there are fears that taking heat off the wheat market and redirecting it to the rice market may in fact trigger a crisis similar to that of the 2008 food crisis. First then, for the sake of our viewers, could you tell us a bit about the causes of the food crisis back in the year 2008? And secondly, do you believe a similar scenario may unfold this time around?
Yeah, that's a great point. So the reasons or there are possible reasons that researchers and economists believe that caused the 2007 and 2008 price spikes. So I'm just going to name some, which will be energy price increases, rising demand for biofuel because of U.S. policy changes, increasing demand for meat and feed, weather shocks like drought, and finally financial speculation that traders believe that commodity price will go up, so they did speculative investing on commodities as well. So all those things together triggered the spike in mostly wheat and corn. And then to fuel that increase, the price increase in wheat triggered the rice price increase. And then India and Vietnam reacted to that price increase by putting a restriction on their export. And then consequently, the importers like Philippines and Nigeria engaged in larger sort of panic buying type of procurement. Now, let's think about the current status, right? In a way that the recent price spikes also kind of leading to similar patterns. We've seen that India put some wheat export ban. We're not seeing explicit bans on rice market yet, and that's an important difference that we need to draw. The wheat market is larger, less concentrated for some exporters, unlike rice. Rice is concentrated with a couple of countries, and like countries like India and Vietnam, if you place some restrictions, then the global market will move quite largely. So the question is whether other countries are going to put, like India or Vietnam, they're going to put some similar export restriction, which would be a bad idea for the sake of global food security. So that would be one question to think about. Another thing is that I was looking at the futures market, and the commodity futures are slowing down in terms of price increase, or actually going down since last couple of weeks, right? That's the difference between 2007 to 2008 and current status, which back then the futures price actually went up for quite a bit.
Right. A valid point there, of course. Professor Sun, I'd like to direct your attention now to another Asian country, Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka, do correct me if I'm wrong, was once considered a self-sufficient country in terms of rice, but its current food crisis is said to have been triggered by an ill-advised government policy shift to organic agriculture. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it is a double-edged sword. Sri Lanka made organic agriculture policy that should reduce the importation of fertilizer and pesticide. As a result, using less fertilizer and pesticide lowers the productivity of rice production, and domestic rice production in Sri Lanka reduced 20% compared to before shifting government policy. So Sri Lanka is not fully self-sufficiency in rice production, not anymore. And recently in South Korea, carbon neutrality is one of the big issues. In the agricultural market, reducing carbon emission can lead to lower the productivity of rice production and threaten the reduction of self-sufficiency. Moreover, if countries which are major crop exporters decide to make organic agriculture, it raises the global food prices as well. So when you think about the environmental impact of government policy changes in agriculture, we also think about the response of self-sufficiency to government policy changes.
Right, I see. Professor Yoon, neighboring Japan is poised to pledge to assist Africa to double its rice production on the continent, that is, to better respond to the global food insecurity amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine, of course. Do you see such efforts as perhaps easing the plight of people there in Africa?
Again, so I'm going back to my earlier point. It's about the demand, right, and the taste. So rice demand in Africa is growing, certainly, but it has a regional differences. Some areas that they start consuming more rice instead of wheat. Some areas that's not the case. So that will be the key aspect that we need to consider. Other thing is the crop suitability. Rice in Africa is mostly grain-fed, unlike Japan or South Korea or India in that sense that they're mostly irrigated. And also in terms of rice yield, in various places in Africa, yield hasn't been growing that fast. So the question here is that such investment or assist in terms of rice production can increase the rice productivity in Africa, or even with those investments, if the crop is not that suitable, that might not work. So Africa is a big continent, so we have to think about which areas or which regions that can deal with better with a better technology. Or rice is just not very suitable in many places in Africa. So that, but again, there's a trade-off between thinking about and investing in the R&D for rice productivity growth in Africa versus supporting them to have a better market accessibility and import a cheaper rice from the globe.
Right, and keeping in mind what Professor Yu has just said, Professor Sun, what do you propose can South Korea do to better assist than its counterparts in Africa and beyond, of course, with regard to food security?
As Professor Yu said, South Korea also contributes support through the United Nations World Food Program to reduce the food crisis in Africa countries. Last year, South Korea contributed $1.2 million to provide humanitarian activities for food crisis for Ethiopia, Nigeria, Madagascar, South Sudan, and Burkina Faso. And also South Korea government also provides international agricultural cooperation project to Africa countries to share Korea's successful experience in agriculture and support the development of farming. Since Africa countries are more suffered from severe food crisis due to conflict, climate change, and the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think that we need to provide more humanitarian assistance to them.
Right, and speaking about humanitarian assistance, Professor Yu, some scholars say that the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, essentially regional multilateral development banks, should step in to tackle the global food crisis. What are your thoughts?
I agree. There's certainly that the roles of these multinational or regional agencies or organizations or banks are important. And especially they're important in a way that there are roles or actions that they can do that the private sectors or single government cannot do. For example, creating a better trade environment that make transaction costs cheaper. That's what the international organization can do. Other thing is innovation, R&D in a global scale. And so technological development for agriculture production. And I'm aware that they do fund those projects, and they also do fund projects that builds better infrastructure, and they also engage in multinational conversation to have a better trade environment as well. So certainly agree that those agencies and organizations should do those actions, and I believe they're working on that.
Right. And Professor Sun, prospects with regard to food security next year apparently look bleaker than they do this year. Do you share this grim outlook? And if that is the case, what do you propose to address this dismal reality?
Yes, I think that we have four main drivers of global food insecurity, such as COVID-19 pandemic, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, economic slowdown, and extreme weather. First, the COVID-19 prolongation would affect global food system. Therefore, we are trying to cooperate the global supply chain to operate the global food system. And second, Ukraine plays a major role in the global food market. So if Russia's invasion of Ukraine keeps going on, the global food security will be affected. Moreover, economic slowdown will reduce global consumption, and less developed countries would face on hunger. Therefore, we provide more humanitarian assistance to reduce global food insecurity. Lastly, we also think about extreme weather conditions that would affect agricultural production. The extreme weather condition makes agricultural production uncertainty in the future. Therefore, we have to monitor weather condition preemptively to produce agricultural production, and we should have international cooperation on climate change.
Right, we should. All right, Professor, so thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Professor, you're over in the US. Thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
On the rural front, farmers are going all out to protect their crops from the extreme weather in recent days, ranging from flash floods to hazardous heat. Our Changwon-ju explains.
Farmers start working on making ditches as soon as the rain stops. They're taking precautionary measures so that the crops will not get flooded when it starts raining again. These days, agricultural workers take extra care to protect crops from unpredictable weather. Farmers also install deep drainage canals in case of water damage and spray disinfectants on the red pepper fields to prevent pests from swarming due to the weather fluctuating between rain and intense heat. If not taken care of in a timely manner, the roots can rot and the stems and leaves can wither.
When there's a heat wave after rain, rice needs to be irrigated to suppress temperature rises and field crops sprinkled with water to control diseases.
In an orchard, if a large amount of moisture suddenly flows in after a drought, the fruit may burst and become damaged. It's therefore important to keep soil moisture levels consistent during the rainy season by covering the ground under the tree with a film. Overgrown branches must be cut so that the flower buds can grow well. Fire blight or bacterium that can infect orchards also spread easily during humid seasons, so orchards must be closely managed.
To let flower buds grow normally, removing overgrown branches or taking measures is advised so the tree gets enough sunlight even on the inside.
If lesions are visible, that means that the pests have already spread, so preliminary monitoring is vital. 정은주, Arirang News.
And this year marks 60 years of diplomatic ties between South Korea and Argentina. Accordingly, Seoul is hosting a showcase of works by a renowned Argentinian artist known for his efforts to effectively engage his audiences. Our Song Yujin shows us how.
Exciting news for fans of contemporary art. There'll be a special exhibition on Nodal Island, located in the capital Seoul, introducing the work of the world-renowned contemporary artist Leandro Erlich from Argentina. But there's something unique about this exhibition in particular.
We've been planning immersive exhibitions where people not merely stand in front of the work to look at it, but throw themselves into the work and become a part of it. And Erlich's work is just that.
A total of 18 pieces are on display. They include 3 big-scale installations, video art, and photos that documented the artist's previous work.
But the highlight of the exhibition is Erlich's most famous work, the bâtiment. It's a unique structure that provides visitors a chance to defy gravity without leaving the ground.
Bâtiment means building in French. The artwork itself consists of a facade that resembles a 4-story building and a huge mirror, which gives people a view as if they're hanging from or crawling on the building. It's been loved the world over after being created in 2004 and exhibited in over 20 countries. But it's actually the project's first time in Korea, and there's something even more special about it.
Actually, this piece in Korea is the original one. It's the one that was created for the first time in Paris. In this case, I felt that it would be a better experience to bring something from its original form, rather to make an adaptation to the local context.
And visitors are loving the experience.
As my kids are on summer vacation, I wanted to find a fun exhibition where they could not only look at the work, but also take part in it.
I felt like Spider-Man when I saw myself crawling on the building through the mirror.
I saw this exhibition on social media saying that it makes you feel like you are traveling abroad, and it really feels like it.
The exhibition runs until December 28th. Those who wish to take a look around can buy tickets online. 송유진, Arirang News.
Right, back in June, South Korea made headlines as it joined the exclusive Global Space Club as its 7th member following the launch of the space rocket Nuri. In this week's feature story, my colleague Shin Yoon sought out the brains behind this breakthrough. Do take a look.
국민 여러분, 대한민국 우주의 하늘이 활짝 열렸습니다.
이륙, 누리호가 발사되었습니다. On June 21st, South Korea's domestically developed rocket, Nuri, blasted off into space. Its launch made South Korea the 7th country in the world with its own space rocket that can carry satellites weighing over 1 ton. Behind this historic feat were the sweat and tears of some of the country's top researchers at the Korea Aerospace Research Institute. It's been through thick and thin, tasting failure during Nuri's first blastoff in October last year.
까지 지금 마지막 계단 하나가 남아 있다고 생각이 듭니다. 내년 5월에 그래서 성공시킬 수 있도록 격려를 부탁드리겠습니다.
Then, seeing Nuri soar up to space without a glitch, I came to talk to some of the engineers here to hear what happened behind the scenes. What Cuddy's engineers remember the most is when Nuri's second launch date was indefinitely delayed. Just before Nuri was set for blastoff on July 15th, Cuddy found an error with the sensor of the oxidizer tank. They decided further inspections were needed and sent back the rocket to the assembly building.
다신 보지 말자 했는데 네가 다시 왔거나 그런 농담들을 좀 많이 했거든요. 좀 좋은 조건, 좋은 날씨 속에서 빨리 발사체를 다시 올리고 싶다는 생각이 좀 강했고 저희 팀의 어떤 숙명과도 같은 건데 사실은 발사를 한다고 그러면 제일 먼저 준비에 들어가서 제일 나중에 나와야 되는 팀이 저희 팀입니다. 그래서
2차 발사 준비하면서도 하여간 센서에 이상이 있어서 철수를 하는데 그때 거의 밤 11시, 10시 반 다 돼서 내려왔거든요. 이건 그때 뭐 비도 오고 뭐 이래가지고 굉장히 어렵게 철수는 했고, 근데 생각보다 그 센서 문제를 또 확인하고 대응 방안 찾는데 아주 조금 쉽게 해결이 된 이런 상황이었습니다.
But just 5 days after detecting the glitch, Kari was ready again. The team of combustion chamber engineers still remember how nervous they were, mainly because the biggest hurdle when developing Nuri was fixing the combustion instability in the rocket engine.
누리호에서는 그러한 것들이 좀 4개가 묶인 거잖아요. 1단 같은 경우는 75톤 4개가 이제 클러스터링이 돼서 그게 이제 처음에 이제 점화가 돼서 이렇게 올라갈 때 그때는 굉장히 막 소름이 끼칠 정도로.
Executive Director Ko Jung-hwan was especially happy. As one of the earliest engineers to join Kari, he had witnessed how far Korea had come in aerospace technology. In the early 2000s, he helped South Korea develop its first space launch vehicle, Naro. Back then, Korea didn't have the infrastructure to test or develop its own engines or rockets. So Russia developed the first stage of Naro, and Korea only made the top stage.
그 과정 하나하나가 사실은 좀 긴장을 늦출 수가 없는 그런 단계들이고, 마지막으로 우리가 15분 뒤에 이제 그 위성을 분리를 했을 때는 이제 그 우리도 드디어 해냈구나 하는 이제 안도감에 굉장히 다들 기뻐했던 것 같습니다.
그때 처음 내뱉으신 한마디가 뭐였을까요?
그냥 소리를 질렀던 것 같아요.
뭐라고 하셨어요?
그냥 그 박수 치다가 그냥 야 이랬던 것 같아요. 네.
Before Nuri, many people had said South Korea is in the old space era, where the government solely developed space technology. But with Nuri, a new concept has been formed, a new space era, where the private sector is also heavily involved. Some 300 companies were on board the Nuri project. And if I borrow Kari's words, they said they couldn't have done it without them.
Like Hanwha Aerospace, which was responsible for manufacturing the heart of Nuri, the engine. Hanwha Aerospace made Nuri's liquid engine to withstand temperatures as low as minus 180 degrees Celsius and as high as 3,300 degrees.
You can't learn how to make liquid engines for rockets anywhere in the world. It's confidential. So at first, we struggled to assemble the liquid engine to the rocket itself. We had to spend countless nights making revisions. When I first joined the team 8 years ago, I had just gotten married. I could hardly go back home to my wife due to the excessive workload.
From 2016, Hanwha Aerospace made 34 engines weighing 75 tons and 12 weighing 7 tons. There's more projects waiting ahead of them, especially since the third Nuri launch, scheduled for early next year, is when the private sector will take over the role of Kari.
Universities also joined the Nuri space mission. A total of 4 universities attached their self-developed cube satellites onto Nuri. Chosun University was the first to release their satellite. I came to talk to the team to hear about their years-long journey.
Taking part in the Nuri project was especially nerve-wracking for Chosun University. They said they were the only second-tier university to be selected as finalists from the 2019 CubeSat contest, held by Kari and the Science Ministry to foster talent that can develop small and cheap cube satellites.
이제 저희가 사실 성공을 굉장히 더 갈구했던 이유 중에 하나도 이제 저희가 좀 그 본보기가 되고 싶었거든요. 지방대학도 그렇게 세강령 뛰고 볼 그런 게 아니다라고 알려주고 싶었는데 사실 지금 그게 저희가 계획한 대로 제대로 안 되다 보니까 더 이제 역시 지방대인가 하는 그런 말들이 많다 보니 그 부분에서 좀 상처를 많이 받았던 것 같습니다.
Chosun University successfully separated their mini satellite at around 5 p.m. on June 29th, but they're still trying to achieve two-way communication. KAIST and Seoul National University were the next in line. Both have successfully achieved two-way communication with their satellites. Regardless of these results, though, they say each university that participated in the Nuri project should be proud.
3년, 4년 동안 어떻게 고생했는지 저희는 같이 알거든요. 근데 비난을 받는다 하면은 기분 좋을 사람은 아무도 없을 것 같거든요. 그래서 저희 입장에서는 같은 동료고 어떤 부분을 잘하고 계시는지, 그리고 서로 이제 분야가 다 다르고 잘하는 분야도 다 다르기 때문에 그분들이 어떤 분야를 잘하고 있는지, 그리고 얼마나 고생을 하셨는지는 당연히 다 알고 있는 부분이기 때문에
좋은 데와 안 좋은 데 이렇게 나누는 그런
기준도 저는 잘 모르겠고 이쪽 분야에서는 제가 봤을 때는 다들 실력이 뛰어난다고 저는 생각하고 있습니다. 그래서 그런 댓글은 그냥 무시하면 될 것 같아요. 네.
Yonsei University was the last to separate their CUBE satellite. Their mission was to observe fine dust over the Korean peninsula. Weeks have passed, but they still haven't secured a beacon signal. But they are appreciative of the opportunity they were given.
이제 서로 전공이 아니기 때문에 개발하면서 그동안 궁금해했던 거 아니면은 이제 해결 못했던 부분들에 대해서 서로 더 질문하고 되게 그런 결과도 얻을 수 있구나 하면서 재밌었던 것 같아요.
Nuri awaits 4 more launches between now and 2027, and each time it aims to take Korea further in the space race.
내년 초에 이제 3차 발사가 준비되어 있다고 하는데 혹시 준비되셨을까요?
차세대 소형기성 2호를 또 탑재하고 우리가 이제 운반을 해줘야 됩니다. 그래서 최선을 다해서 문제없이 운반해 드리도록 하겠습니다.
신예은, 아리랑 뉴스.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Kentucky, the U.S. state is in the grip of what's been called its worst flood in history. State Governor Andy Beshear said on Sunday local time that at least 28 people have been killed as a result of floods brought on by torrential rain in eastern Kentucky. Beshear predicted that fatalities will rise as authorities continue to find bodies. He added that as of Saturday, 4 children were confirmed as being among the dead. 14,000 power outages were also reported in the state, while the National Weather Service has forecast more rain until Tuesday. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden on Friday declared a major disaster in the state, freeing up federal funds for the state. The floods are the second disaster to hit Kentucky after a series of tornadoes killed almost 80 people there in December. Now, debris from China's Long March 5B rocket has re-entered the Earth's atmosphere 6 days after first being launched into space. The remains of the 30-meter-long core stage of China's most powerful rocket fell back to Earth over the Indian and Pacific Oceans on Saturday. The China Manned Space Agency on Sunday reported that most of the debris burnt up on re-entry, while the rest landed in waters off the Philippines. It's still unclear whether any debris fell on land. The rocket was used to carry a new module to China's Tiangong space station. NASA has previously called for China to follow international norms by designing its rockets so they burn up on re-entry rather than falling to Earth and potentially causing damage. Just days before the second anniversary of a massive explosion at a grain store in Beirut port, a portion of the still-standing 48-meter-tall silos collapsed. On Sunday, part of the severely damaged silos fell, triggering fears of further collapse. So far, no injuries have been reported. The incident comes just a week after Lebanese officials warned that the northern section of the complex had begun tilting at an accelerated rate. It also comes in the wake of a weeks-long fire at the silos, believed to have been caused by a mixture of summer heat and leftover fermented grain. An explosion at the port on August 4th, 2020, killed over 215 people and was caused by unsafe storage of ammonium nitrate. England have won their first ever major women's football trophy. They beat Germany at Wembley Stadium on Sunday in the final of the UEFA Women's Euro 2022. The Lionesses won the match 2-1 after extra time, the winner scored by Chloe Kelly in the 110th minute. 8-time champions Germany faced a setback when top scorer Alexandra Popp picked up an injury before the match. England took the lead through Ella Toone in the 62nd minute. Germany's Lina Magul equalized in the 79th minute before England got a winner in extra time. The win is England's first major trophy since 1966 and came in front of 87,192 fans, a record-breaking crowd for a European Championship final. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Monday afternoon. Now the rain in the capital has subsided. However, the sixth typhoon of the season, Trasas, is still affecting the country, bringing bands of rain clouds, especially to the south coast and Jeju Island. Well, those areas are also very prone to strong wind and high waves. The rain will taper off tomorrow, but until then, we're expecting up to 100 millimeters in northern parts of Gyeonggi-do province and 20 to 70 millimeters in other Midwestern regions. Some of you might see torrential heavy rain with stormy conditions, so drive safely and leave a bit earlier if you're traveling somewhere. Well, it's very sticky and muggy outside, and the rain is not enough to alleviate the sweltering heat. Now, heat advisories have been newly issued in Chungcheongnam-do province and many southern regions. Highs are 1 to 6 degrees higher than yesterday, feeling much hotter due to the high humidity. And it's possible heat alerts could be expanded, so always look out for heat warnings and be ready for another heat wave. Now, let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of the Daily Report. We'll be back with more coverage tomorrow. That is Tuesday. Join us then.